Do you sound like sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal? So, through the Apostle Paul, God instructs us to walk in love with one another. That's what we see in Corinthians. The 1 Corinthians chapter 13 is the chapter of love. That's what he deals with throughout that whole thing, and we'll get into that in just a second. But God instructs us to walk in love with one another. Without love, we come across like sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. That is, we are annoying, irritating sound that seems to eternally echo in people's ears.
Edit the video setting to public.
Sorry about that. Without love, we come across like sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. That is, we are annoying, irritating sound that seems to eternally echo in people's ears. So the love of God visibly at work in and through our lives is what gets people's attention and draws people to Him. I'll say that one more time. That's one of the important things that I'm going to say here tonight. The love of God visibly at work in and through our lives is what gets people's attention and draws people to Him. So when people see that God is operating through us, can visibly see God operating through us, that is when we get people's attention and draw people to Him. Why? Because when people see Him, people see love. Because God is love. No other way to say it. God is love. So God has called us to walk in love at all times. Every second of every day. Now, for some of us, that's a little more impossible to do than others. But that's what we're called to do. The book of Matthew says, in Matthew it says, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And to love one another as you love yourself. And then it goes on to say, on this all the laws hang. He's all right. He's just making an adjustment, guys. So once again, Matthew, it tells us to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might, to love one another as Christ has loved the church. And Jesus goes on to say, on these all the laws hang. So what Jesus was saying there is everything operates on love. Everything does. All of the laws operate off of love. So that's the reason why when we walk in love and continue to walk in love, we keep the commandments of God. So I ran across this little story and I thought it was pretty neat, so I'm gonna read it to you. It's not very long, just a little bitty story. And it says, located in downtown Moscow, there is a bridge that is situated on a waterway right between the Kremlin and the Tretyakov Gallery. It is called the Bridge of Love, and it is very important to the Muscovites. I guess that's some people that live there. That's what they call themselves, I guess. It says, when many of the local couples get married, they come to this bridge on their wedding day to fasten a special personalized look onto one of the 7 trees nearby. By doing so, they are saying to everyone, we're in love and we're locked to each other for the rest of our lives. This visual experience of love may be the easiest thing they do to demonstrate their commitment. Actually, walking in love on a day-to-day basis will be the most challenging thing they do in life. Indeed, real love calls for a life of sacrifice. As a matter of fact, for any relationship to be at its best, we have to be willing to become each other's servant. Got to be willing to become each other's servant. If you're not going to do that, then it just won't last. You've got to serve each other. That is what God calls us to do as Christians. To walk in love with each other. It's what we're called to do. In 1 Corinthians 13, the Apostle Paul gives us what many have called the love test. This passage of Scripture has been read at countless weddings and preached about in numerous messages. Paul opens the chapter by saying, "Though I speak with the tongue of men and angels and have not charity, I am become as sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal." The word charity in this verse and throughout the entire chapter, when you read that, is the Greek word agape, which describes the purest kind of love. It's the purest kind of love that there is. Why? Because it's the God kind of love, which is totally unconditional and selfless. So when you see the word charity, it means love. Paul went on to write 1 Corinthians 13, 4 through 8. So let's read this. 1 Corinthians 13, 4 through 8. It says, "Love suffers long and is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not parade itself, is not puffed up, does not behave rudely, does not seek its own, is not provoked, thinks no evil, does not rejoice in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails, but whether there are prophecies, they will fail. Whether there are tongues, they will cease. Whether there is knowledge, it will vanish away." So I was reading through this today, studying up for tonight, and I got to this part, and I was reading this verse, and God laid on my heart. I just read the definition of a female. It's what He told me today when I read that, because that's what they are. That's the way they operate until you cross them. And then it's a different story. But as long as you're good to them and you treat them right and you do what you're supposed to do as a husband, this is the way a wife looks at you. It's the definition of a woman, not the definition of a man. Pastor's staring at me. But it is. It's the definition of a woman. That's what God showed me when I was reading this. He said, "You just read the heart of a woman." Now, that wasn't in my notes, so don't get too upset with me, Pastor. I know you walk in love. I'm not saying that, so stop staring at me. 66 years. So, these verses here are very powerful. What is interesting about them is it's not only do they describe the love God has for us, they also describe the kind of love He wants us to have for one another. As we walk through this series, so it is going to be a series. I've got I don't know, notes to probably do about 5 teachings on this thing, and I'll get to it based around what Nan wants to do with what she's talking about. So I do have about 5 teachings on this that I want to get in. So as we go through this, we're going to take a closer look at the original Greek meanings of key words in this passage, and we'll see just how well we score on the love test and in our love walk. So let's begin by examining the meaning of this verse in 1 Corinthians 13:1. Paul painted a picture to the Corinthian believers to where they could understand it. So in order to better understand what Paul is saying in 1 Corinthians 1, it's helpful to understand the background of this verse. So apparently Paul had encountered a group of people in the city of Corinth who were projecting themselves as being deeply spiritual. These Corinthians said they spoke in tongues of men and even in tongues of angels. They said that about themselves. We speak in the tongue of men and we speak in the tongues of angels. So they're saying they're speaking in the Spirit. They didn't know enough about it at the time to call it speaking in the Spirit. So they said we speak with the tongue of men. We talk like I'm talking to you now, and then we speak in the tongue of angels. We speak in tongues, was what they were saying. So although they presented themselves as being super spiritual, Paul knew otherwise. Paul knew their actions didn't match their spiritual claims. So to put it plainly, there was no demonstration of love in their lives, and to be around these people was absolutely sickening. So I ask you a question. Have you ever met anyone like that? Anyone that brags on themselves, boasts about themselves, how great and how grand that they are? You all ever met anybody like that? And it's just to the point that I can't stand to be around them. You'd rather go run yourself into a brick wall than to even have to talk to them. So someone who claims to have profound revelations from God and is constantly boasting about all the amazing things that they're doing. Look at me. This is the type of person that when you see them coming, you want to run in the opposite direction as fast as you can. I'm sure we all know some people like that. Not me, because I walk in love all the time, but even if he or she does have profound revelations from God, the fact that they are so self-absorbed and the lack of love of God in their life is just nauseating to you. Just makes you sick. These are the kind of people Paul had encountered while in Corinth. And they prompted him, to write 1 Corinthians 13:1. Though I speak with the tongue of men and of angels, and have not charity, have not love, I am become as sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. When Paul said, and have not charity, love, the word have is from the Greek word echo, which means to have, to hold, or to possess. So in the context here, Paul was saying, if I speak with the tongue of men and angels, but do not have or hold or possess love in my life, I have become as sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. So what is sounding brass? So the word brass in 1 Corinthians 13:1 is the Greek word chalkos, which describes metal, and in this case it indicates bronze or copper to which a small amount of tin had been added. Look at me, I'm not even paying attention to what I'm doing here. I was just put all these Greek words and definitions up there, but it's all good. So chalkos, which describes metal, in this case it indicates bronze or copper, to which a small amount of tin had been added. The added tin caused the metal to have a hollow, empty sound when it was beaten. Now, this brass is not ordinary. It's sounding brass. The word sounding is a translation of the word echo, I can't even say it. I ain't even going to try. ECHEO, which describes a noise that reverberates or echoes, and it seems it will never stop. This word was also used to depict the non-stop roaring of the sea. If you've ever been near the sea during a storm, you understand how deafening the sound can be and how the noise is impossible to escape. When Paul coupled these two words together, sounding brass, he was describing the endless beating of metal that produces a hollow, annoying, irritating echo that seems to internally reverberate. What you may not know is that he borrowed this image from a common activity in the pagan environment in Corinth, as well as in the pagan cities of Ephesus, Rome, Athens, Pergamum, Laodicea, and every other major city that was filled with paganism. In the pagan world, there was religious fantasies, and these fantasies wanted to attract spiritual entities to them. They believed that if they were my goodness, I am getting tongue-tied tonight. So they believed that if they would bang their musical instruments, which were made of brass, bronze, or copper, and would just keep banging on them endlessly, the false entities they worship would come to them. That's what the pagans believed. Just keep beating them things, they'll come to you. Pagan priests used the banging and clanging to not only attract more demonic entities, but also to drive pagan people into a frenzied state of ecstasy. Under the influence of drugs and wine, pagan worshippers would dance wildly as the pagan priests banged harder and faster on their instruments. It seemed impossible to escape their never-ending noise. The Corinthians believers to whom Paul was writing clearly understood what he was describing. Why did they understand it? Because they were right there in the middle of all that stuff. They lived all the way around it. Everywhere they looked, that's all they seen. Corinth was a very spiritually dark place filled with pagan temples and activities. Thus the phrase, sounding brass, is the picture of pagan worshippers frantically and endlessly banging on their musical instruments. The sound they produced echoed throughout the city and was extremely annoying. This phrase, sounding brass, eventually came to denote people who talk intensely and are just like the non-stop clanging of the pagan worshipers. They are so consumed with themselves and their own relationship and self-importance that they never shut up. Paul said these individuals are a shallow, empty, irritating, clanging noise to those around them. Like I said, we probably know some of them. So the next word, a tinkling cymbal. So Paul went on to add that these same people are like tinkling cymbals. When you hear the word tinkling, you may think of a small, insignificant sound. Something little and tiny, teeny. But it is actually just the opposite. In the Greek, the word tingling is alazon, which means to clash or to crash loudly. There is nothing tinkling about it. It is a non-stop crashing and slashing of a cymbal, which is the Greek word cymbal, describing a cymbal. When these two words are joined to form the phrase tinkling cymbal, it describes a constant, loud clashing of cymbals, much like the clashing cymbals played by the Jewish people just before they went to war. The clashing of these cymbals was a call to arms. It sounded the signal that it was time to fight. Sounding brass and a tinkling cymbal was something nerve-wracking and irritating. It aroused one's emotions, making him or her fighting mad. These are the words the Holy Spirit prompted Paul to use to describe a person who claims to be spiritually great but doesn't demonstrate love in his life. This individual can become such an irritant to you that you will want to go to war with them. They are so self-absorbed and so self-focused that they never ask about you or anyone else. So taking into the account the original Greek meaning of these words, here's the way that we would look at this verse, the Greek version of this verse. It would read like this: even if I converse fluently in the language of men and of angels, but do not possess love, then it's all nothing more than empty, hollow sounds. I'm going to read that to you one more time. Even if I converse fluently in the languages of men and of angels, but do not possess love, then it's all nothing more than empty, hollow sounds. Guys, Paul's talking about speaking in tongues here. He's talking about speaking in tongues here. He's talking about our everyday language, just carrying on a conversation with just anybody. But he's also talking about the language of men and of angels. He's talking about speaking in tongues. So Paul's telling us here, when we speak in tongues and we don't have love, it is nothing more than empty, hollow sounds. Don't mean anything. Don't mean anything. So even your prayer language, if you walk without love, has no meaning. As you've heard us say it, and I know you've heard pastors say it, everything operates off of love. And we've probably never even put the thought into it that it operates off of our prayer language too. See, people like this who claim to be super spiritual but lack love sound a lot like the nonstop banging and clanging of pagan brass instruments in your city that you wish would stop. Those who go around pretending to be deeply spiritual, but who are sorely deficient in love, are so annoying that when you feel trapped in the vicinity near them, you will begin to look for any way possible to escape from being trapped with them. Even if they may say all the right things, their lack of love makes them as irritating that's getting on your nerves as the clanging brass instruments that make you want to scream, stop it! Stop it now! So let's be honest. These super spiritual motor mouths talk incidentally about how spiritual they are, but their absence of love makes it nothing more than a bunch of verbal hoobaloo. Just a bunch of garbage. This hyped up spiritual talk of these folks who demonstrate zero love to match their words is so offensive and nauseating that it can nearly cause your flesh to battle just to get them to shut up. Instead of exploding in anger, put yourself in their shoes. But I'll say it better than that. Instead of exploding in anger, just stay in love. Just stay in love. You know, I'd say in there, put yourself in their shoes because, you know, until we understand where somebody's coming from, we don't really understand them. But the best way to deal with those people is just to stay in love with them. But here's the thing, they may get on your nerves, and I mean to the point that you just don't even want to see them. They irritate me so bad I don't even want to see them. But if you'll stay in love with them and continue to walk in love with them, that love of God that comes through you will change them. But if you get mad and you explode and blow up on them, you're not going to change nothing in them. You're just going to make them worse. So with these kinds of people, you need extra grace from God to be patient and deal with them in love. Although they may truly have revelations from God, it is extremely hard to receive what they have to say because of the pride that seems to ooze from them. Instead of slapping them or tearing into them verbally, what they really need is for you to confront them by speaking the truth in love. The best thing you can do for someone like this is to pray for the opportunity for you or for someone else to speak the truth in love to them. So I want to ask you, what if you were the person that people were repelled at and wanted to avoid? What if you were that person? What if it was your words and actions that were pushing people away? Thank God that ain't none of us, right? So if the tables were turned and you were the one who was like sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal, wouldn't you want somebody to be patient with you and speak the truth to you in love? I would. See, one thing's certain. We will always have these kind of irritating people with us. We always will. So we need the Spirit of God to do a work in us to be able to love them and deal with them like Jesus himself would have.
Yes, they do.
Don't marry them. So we've got to have his heart, his mind, his words, and his timing to say what these people need to hear. So more or less, be led by the Spirit. Spirit will give you all of this stuff, and he'll give you the exact time to say it. But before we say anything to anyone, we need to make sure, listen to me now, before we say anything to anyone, we need to make sure everything is right within our own heart. So the next Wednesday I teach, and I'm going to continue to look here at 1 Corinthians 13. We're going to see what else the Holy Spirit spoke through Paul about walking in love. So I want to ask you today, or tonight, sorry, who's the motor mouth in your life that's driving you crazy with their spiritual self-importance? Don't tell me, I don't want to know who they are, especially if it's me. So don't tell me, just think about it. Who is that person? We all have those people in our lives. Biggest part of the time it's when we go to work, we have to work with them. No place worse in the world, I wouldn't think, than to have to deal with somebody like that at your work. There ain't no way you can get away from them. You're stuck with them for 8 hours a day. But it'd also be a good thing. So this person would be the person that you cringe at seeing and seek to avoid if all possible. So who is that person? So here's what I want to say to you. Instead of slapping them silly or tearing into them verbally, what does God want you, how does God want you to respond to them? So let's look at it. Turn over to Ephesians chapter 4, verse 15. Ephesians 4:15. Ephesians 4:15 says, "But speaking the truth in love may grow up in all things into Him who is the head, Christ." Verse 25, "Therefore, putting away lying, let each one of you speak truth with his neighbor, for we are members of one another." So how does God want you to respond to that?
Truth.
By speaking the truth. That's right. By speaking the truth. It's what the Bible tells us to do, to speak the truth. People don't always want to hear the truth, but that's what the Bible tells us to do. The Bible tells us if we've got somebody like that in our lives, we speak the truth to them. But we speak the truth to them in love. That don't mean that you get to speak the truth and go up and say, "You're a dirty, rotten scoundrel." Don't mean you get to call them names. Because that ain't the truth. That's just what you think they are. Right? That's not who they really are. Because they're the same as you. That's what the Word tells you. They're a born-again believer, and obviously they are, because we're talking about people here that get those revelations from God and just act like that they're holier than you are because they hear from God and you didn't. So obviously they're a Christian, so that's your opinion, that they're a dirty, rotten scoundrel. It's not God's opinion of them. So you got to speak the truth to them. So I want to ask you this. If the tables were turned and you were the one who was acting like a sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal, how would you want someone to respond to you? What would be the best attitude with which they could approach you? With love. What words do you think would be the best for them to speak to you to really get through to you.
True.
The truth, but you'd want them to do it easily and in love. You wouldn't want them to come up and say, "Let me tell you something, you moron." You wouldn't want them to do that to you. Let me tell you something, you big idiot. You wouldn't want them to do that to you.
He might get his head clapped.
What was that?
I said he might get his head clapped.
Probably would. Then we're in a whole different situation. Ain't nobody walking in love now. So yeah, walk up and call somebody an idiot, and you might get a handful of fists, and then you return in the favor, and then you got to go home and repent before you go to hell. It's the way it works in the Nazarene church, ain't it? So what would they need to say to you, and how would they need to say it? Because that's just the way it is. Ask yourself those questions when you have to deal with them kind of people. If this was me, how would I want them to handle me? And then handle them that way. Kindness. Kindness, but still telling them the truth.
You don't have to put it to death.
That's right.
I've acted those ways.
And that's right. That you don't know what you're going to do until you put it to the test. Just like that woman driving in front of me that I didn't like the way she's driving, I called her a heaver. I was walking in my truth at that moment. That's what I thought of her. But wasn't walking in the truth and the love that God wanted me to.
People called, they told me, somebody called me up to shoot me out, but they told her they were. I hang my phone up. That happened the other morning. I was in the kitchen, it happened. I was in
I didn't think I heard you on the phone anymore. I didn't think I heard you on the phone any longer.
I was in, after the computer room talking on the phone, they both of them, man and woman, both started acting, Bobby on the phone, I just laid down, went on in the kitchen, and I go back and hung up. Oh, man, don't get that.
So anyway, I had about 3 more questions here I want to ask you, but I mean, it's just pretty much just going to go on talking about what we were talking about.
You know, I got a good example of that that I learned this past 2 weeks. You know,
I bet you did.
I had to deal with Heather, and I mean, I didn't get nasty with her, but I just told her what I thought, and you know, she just loved me. She just talked. I mean, I didn't talk hateful or loud or anything like that, but you know, she just came back at me with just kind words. She never once acted bad. She called me today, and she was just as sweet as she could be. She's always been that way with me.
So that's the one thing I could always say about her was, I didn't ever hear myself say this, but that's the one, I would like to be like her.
Right, yeah.
And I really would, because I know I was trying to make a joke there, but I really would, because that's the way she is. No matter what happened while she was here,
Right.
and no matter what it was always, love you.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd say something to her, and about because I'd get irritated while she was here. I'd get irritated at her. You know, because I was just like, why don't you just do what they ask? I mean, and if that was the case, why don't you just say it? I mean, I get irritated at her. And she did. And I would say stuff like that, and she'd just sit there and listen. And then she'd always respond back, I love you, Josh. And then you're like, man, I feel like a big idiot.
I would say something about, you know, Heather, you didn't tell us the truth. And she would come back and say, well, you know, just let me try. Just let me try. And I thought, you know what? Try. How long is it going to take you? It takes you a long time to learn to play keyboard. And I told her, I said, you know, we're desperate. We need somebody now. And, but she never gave up. I'll give her that.
Well, don't worry, man. I told Pastor Day I'm going to start taking piano lessons side way.
Hey, you know, I actually went in and was playing on our piano.
Huh?
You can take piano lessons too.
Some
I like to
great
play.
songs.
I wish I could play a banjo. I can do drums a little bit.
Well, you know, she was, I ain't got nothing bad to say about her. I really truly don't, because I actually learned from her. I did. I actually learned some stuff from her, such as that. Because I'm going to tell you, if that would have been me sitting in her shoes, I got out of Dodge a long time ago. I got out of Dodge a long time ago and probably had a few choice words to say on the way out the door. And not that I'm saying that we did anything wrong, but, you know, just from the whole situation altogether, I wouldn't have been happy about it at all, but not her. So we took her to the airport on Tuesday morning. Me and I took her, and she sat in the back seat. 3 o'clock in the morning. Get up, we head out this way. We picked her up. It's about 3:45, and we get to driving. I ain't seen 3:45 since I was probably 20 years old. We got to driving across through there going to Charlottesville, and she's sitting in the back seat and just, and I had one of my moments here. Sitting there thinking, like I said a while ago, stop it, just stop it. Just stop. Stop talking. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. Be quiet. It was. It was. But I'll tell you, when we got here to pick her up, we walked in, she hugged me, she tried to hug Ike, and I didn't know what in the world was going on. He was like, what are you? So anyway, we get her stuff loaded up in the car, take her to Charlottesville, and I mean, she talks all the way over there like we're the best friends in the whole entire world. And we get over there, me and I get out, and we grab 2 of the luggage carts, and we load her luggage up on it. We asked her, hey, you going to be all right, or do you need us to take your luggage in for you? And she's like, no, we can push it. It's on a cart, had wheels on it. And she's like, no, we got it. We can handle it. And then she walked up, hugged me again, and she said, Josh, I love you, and I appreciate everything you did for me. And I was like, I'm stupid again. So I did. I learned a lot from her. I really did. Because I'm going to tell you, I would have never acted the way that she did with all of that. I might have said I love you, but I sure never meant a second of it. I'm just being honest with you. I'd have probably got over in my flesh on that one pretty quick. And, you know, like I said, not that we did anything wrong here. And did we learn from that? You better believe we did. I ain't talking about what I was talking about from there. Talking about with the way that we handled that situation as leadership and everything else. We learned from that. We did. That was a learning curve from us, and we learned from that situation. So,
She told me today to read Psalms 12, 112.
Said what?
She told me today, she said, I've been reading Psalms 112, said, read it with me today. And I never did get back to it because I had the baby in. But I see it.
there it goes. I'm going to turn this off. Thanks for being with us. Hopefully it's dead.
It went that one off a good long.
Good, that's dead. They didn't pick up. I forgot that thing was videotaping. Because she knows how to find us on Facebook. So,
It went off before.
You want me to unplug this one?
yeah.